Alrighty then folks, so this is Crazy Welder, and in this video I'm going to be going over my little video rendering rig that I have been reworking recently. Now, some of you may have seen this particular rig before in this case, and I'll have the links down in the video description below. And I had my basically kind of AM3 plus motherboard in here, and it was sort of hanging off to the side. And it was a pretty decent board, and you know, it seemed to do okay, but the problem is I wanted a really compact case that I could just sort of, you know, stick in the back of my car if I needed to go work on stuff. And so I had this really low profile case, and I've decided to kind of make some changes here. So one of the biggest changes that you'll see in here is that obviously now the motherboard is no longer sticking outside, because I actually have a different motherboard in here, which is now a sort of much smaller motherboard, actually designed to fit in here. I believe this is an ITX motherboard. I might be getting my terminology confused, but basically I have my Ryzen 2700X in here. I have a kit of 16 gigs of 3400 megahertz RAM. Obviously with these older Ryzen processors, going a little bit faster on the RAM is typically a little bit better. I also have an R9 Nano in here, which is going to be liquid cooled. And so I have a 140 mil rad down here with a 140 millimeter fan. There's also going to be this little kind of reservoir for that up here, which is basically a 120 mil reservoir. So you can kind of see that when I turn this whole thing around. So you can see it's kind of just hanging out over in this area right here. Very useful thing. I actually didn't even know that these existed. Basically you mount them into any sort of standard fan mounting location, and then at that point you've got yourself a nice slim reservoir that fits into many sort of small form factor cases that you can use. Then I also have a 120 mil radiator up here for the CPU, and it's cooled by this very small thermal take fan that I have on here. It's a fairly slim fan, but the CPU doesn't need a whole bunch of cooling, and since it's going to be liquid cooled, that makes life just a heck of a lot easier. So this is going to have a separate reservoir for this. I'm not going to be reusing the same one from the GPU because I want everything to kind of remain nice and cool. So that's the cooling for the CPU, and the GPU stuff is down at the bottom over there. And then if you kind of take a look in here, I also do have a kind of small 800 watt power supply down here. Again, this one's designed for kind of smaller cases to fit into this kind of stuff. And then there's going to be kind of a bunch of wizardry going on in terms of the mounting for everything. So this is going to store a bunch of Intel SSDs, which are M.2 SSDs, and I'll show you where those will be in a second. The GPU is going to have a PCIe extender, which is going to be going back to the PCIe slot. The Intel SSDs are going to actually run off of an M.2 slot that's included in the motherboard over here. And then on the back, I'm also going to have an additional M.2 slot being taken up. You can't quite see it in here, but it's basically at the back of the motherboard, and that's going to be going to basically a kind of 10 gig card for Ethernet, which is going to be using basically a very fast cable, so a 10 gig cable, and that's going to be going to another 10 gig card, you know, a NIC card in my main computer. So this will basically be a really fast link between these two systems, so that I'll be able to kind of shuttle video files back and forth at really quick speeds. This enclosure in here contains 4 Intel SSDs, which are the M.2 SSDs, and also in the back here, you can't quite see it, but in that same mounting location is the NIC itself. And of course down here you can see the liquid cooler for the card and the card itself. So it's kind of just going to hang out down here. It's sort of a janky build, but fairly compact overall, and it allows me to do some really cool things in terms of, you know, being able to have a really nice powerful video rendering rig that I'll be able to offload stuff onto when I'm not trying to use my main computer for rendering. So I'll be able to put out some faster videos and more videos, hopefully, as time progresses. So that's kind of the basic gist of the idea so far. I still need a little bit more time, a little bit more money invested into this thing before it all sort of comes together and starts working. Definitely still need a couple of water blocks and things like that that will need to go onto here to make it all worthwhile. And the boot drive for the system is going to be just a standard SATA SSD. It's going to be living in this little slot right here, so that'll provide the Windows ecosystem for this whole thing to kind of just run and do whatever it needs to do. So that's, that's the case in a nutshell. Again, a couple of kind of radical things in terms of the design and thinking about the way that this is all going to play out and the way it's going to work. Ultimately, as I get a little bit more time to work on this thing, I'll be uploading more and more videos on this build to kind of show you how everything came together, essentially, and hopefully it running in the end and me being able to show you the sort of performance I get out of this little rig right here. I'll put the specs as well as the links to everything in the description below so you guys can check that out, and I'll see you in the next build video for this guy.